Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. The recent Legends of Runeterra World Championship has concluded, and the Darkin decks, the game has recently released an expansion that's all about Darkin, introducing like 10 or 11 unique Darkin cards for us to play with. Those Darkin cards were everywhere all over the World Tournament, and that was a really cool thing for me personally, because I am absolutely in love with the concept of Darkin in general, and it really got me to thinking, why are Darkin so popular? Why are they cool? And how have Riot sold us so hard on this concept, this fantasy concept that, as far as I'm aware, doesn't really exist in any other media that I've seen. So honestly, today's video, I wanted to talk about why the Darkin are such a cool concept and why so many players, myself included, resonate with this concept and think it's really, really neat. First, the concept of Darkin is something that fits very well within the established lore. Oftentimes, Riot will invent concepts or entire areas of the world simply to justify their newest champion release, which essentially makes the companion or the champion compatible in reverse. Seraphine is probably the best example of this. Riot essentially said, we have to make a pop star champion that we can add to KDA, so Zaun is now a pop star realm. Seraphine exists, and she's a pop star, and she's from Piltover and Zaun, and this isn't a problem, and this isn't weird at all. And she doesn't fit with the design look of Zaun and Piltover at all either, but this has to happen because we're going to retroactively justify it, right? It doesn't mesh. Seraphine doesn't feel like an organic part of the world. It feels like she was added, and then Riot justified it after the fact. Another good one is Qiyana. It feels like Ixtal was created to explain Qiyana's design, rather than the idea behind Ixtal coming first, and Qiyana then being a representation of it afterwards. Right, and so neither of these are particularly good examples of the character fitting with the world. It feels like they are created and then Riot justifies them in the world rather than the other way around. Conversely, I think Darkin fit very nicely with the established lore. They were Ascended Warriors. There were like 300 Ascended at one time, and the sort of question is, well, what happened to all of them, right? After the Ascension ritual where Azir was betrayed, and after the whole thing in Acacia happened with the Void, right? What happened to all of the Ascended? The answer was they became Darkin, which is actually a Shriman word that means the Fallen. And basically, and it makes sense, right? You have these super powerful demigod warriors who have been through hell and back, whose leader is gone, and there's no sort of like major will to command them and control them. They were at the Void, and plenty of them were corrupted in body or corrupted in mind, as we see in Joral, who basically has PTSD from everything he saw when fighting the Void. And inevitably then, these extremely powerful beings who have no one to keep hold of them are going to start doing things of their own and get into conflicts with each other, and especially then end up at war with each other and have these ginormous fights that led to the Darkin Wars, which eventually then led to the Celestial Targonians stepping in and saying, okay, we have to nip this in the bud because otherwise the world literally is going to end, and technically we're responsible for this because we helped the Shireenans make the Sun Disk, which let them make the Ascended in the first place, right? Which is then like a little neat loop of, yeah, the Targonians created the Ascended turned to Darkin, and the Targonians then were the ones to help deal with the Darkin. It fits so nicely in with the established lore and with helping to explain where the Ascended all went and what Darkin are supposed to be and why Darkin are trapped in their weapons or items nowadays. It works so nicely that it doesn't feel like Darkin were created as this explanation or justification. It feels like they were almost always intended to be a part of the lore, which is really, really nice, and I think then works super well with the concept as a whole. Now, this is a little bit of a weak reason because Riot did have to basically say, yes, Ascended are Darkin. This is technically kind of sort of a retcon, as opposed to like us figuring it out organically, but it's still really cool that they have obvious origins in history. The second reason I think Darkin are a good concept is because they're a cool take on an existing fantasy trope. There are plenty of fantasy universes out there that have cursed or possessed items or weapons, which, when wielded, can either replace the user with whatever was trapped inside, maybe sometimes doing a one-for-one swap, so whatever was in the sword is now out of it, and you're now in the sword, or they control the user, right? If you pick up the cursed sword, the sword controls you and tries to kill people with itself, but you're wielding it, right? Or they curse the user, or like, whatever, right? Like, it's not a new concept. There are plenty of examples of this sort of being the case in like fantasy media, sci-fi media, whatever. There are plenty of sort of cursed or possessed items and weapons and things. And in that regard, Darkin aren't brand new. I do think, however, that Darkin take the trope up to 11, right? There is something inside that creepy weapon. It's not just a personality, right, that's trapped in there. It's a literal being, and if you touch the object, the thing inside the object will reshape your body into its own and obliterate you as a person in the meantime, right? Like, that's terrifying. Like, just consider what happened to the poor guy who touched the Darkin Blade, or the guy who touched the Darkin Aegis, right? Like, that's awful what happens to those people. Or like even Varys, right? Varys took two individual human beings and melded their bodies together to create a new form for himself. It's just a really, really cool way, and very body horror-y, but it's a unique take on this sort of curse or possessed sword concept, that, like, yeah, there is something inside the sword, but it's not just gonna, replace you in a one-for-one swap or, like, control your body. It's going to take your body and reshape that into something else. And I think then, even better, the form isn't limited to humanoid, right? The thing that comes out of the weapon or item or whatever isn't limited to just being a person, right? We have Naganeka, who's a beast from the Noxian Steppes who touched the Darkin Ballista and became Naganeka, or Ibaros, who likely used some sort of Leviathan, or Balkux, who used a bandlewood tree to make his new form, which is even then like a cooler concept when you consider what we used to know about the Darkin, where it had to be a person picks up the sword and then becomes a Darkin. It's sort of even more terrifying knowing that the weapon can use anything it happens to find. I think this also works because the Darkin, yeah, they don't look like you, but it's because they're trying to recreate what they used to look like. And that then has some interesting concepts when you remember that Ascended are all sort of animal-headed deities, and you can even kind of see that in some of the Darkin's forms, right? Obviously twisted and reshaped beyond all recognition, but even a little bit, right? Like Aatrox's wings. Why does he have wings? Well, he might have been like a hawk or something in the Shuriman pantheon, and now those wings are still there, even though he's not really a hawk at that point, right? It's just a really, really cool take on this sort of weapon possession trope that has existed previously. I think one of the other things, the final reason why I think Darkin are really cool is because the weapon, it actually tells you something about the character, and it's a very neat thing that Riot are able to do from a character development perspective, to be able to say, hey, this character, right, something will be told to you by what item it was that they were trapped in, right? As an example, Aatrox is the Darkin Blade. He is a greatsword. And Aatrox is someone who is framed as a once proud and noble warrior, right? The sword being seen as this sort of symbol of honor and fighting fairly and justly, and whatever you want to say about the sword, right? It's a very romanticized weapon, but in Aatrox's hands, it's this giant greatsword. It's this big smashing weapon that, yeah, it can cut still, but it's also almost more efficient as just like this ginormous crushing instrument of death than anything else. And it represents Aatrox quite well then, because Aatrox, naturally, is a character whose sort of motivations have been twisted. He was a noble warrior, and now all he wants to do is end the world. And I think then it makes sense, right? He has a sword still, representing the noble warrior, but he also now has this big sword, this smashing sword, this great sword, that sort of gets across his just like murderous intent towards the rest of the world. Or if you want to look at a Legends of Runeterra unique character, Zolani, whose art I will have linked down the description if you haven't played Legends of Runeterra, but she has the Darkin Bloodletters. And Zolani is supposed to be a healer. Her whole shtick is that she was trying to heal people as an Ascended, and this has eventually manifested when she became a Darkin as a desire to control people so no one could ever be hurt again, right? And to do that, she controls them through their blood. She basically says, you can't move, you can't do anything but serve me, because that way you're safe, you're protected, and I know that you're going to be safe forever, right? Because I love you. And it's a very twisted and creepy kind of take on a healer. And the reason bloodletters, I think, work is that they aren't officially weapons, right? They are intended to let the blood, which in some ancient cultures, letting blood was intended to be a way of curing sickness, right? We're going to cut you and let you bleed because your illness is being caused by a distemper of the humors, right? You have too much blood, so we're going to exsanguinate you in order to make that better, right? Which is a very not how medicine works, but that then works with Zolani, right? And that her like desire to help people is a twisted sort of form of love. In that same vein, the bloodletting is a twisted form of helping people. It just works really, really well, and it tells you something about the character. And all of the Darkin are like this. If you look at any of the Darkin's actual like weapon form, you learn something about the character. You can tell something about the character, and that's just such a cool concept that even if you were to make your own Darkin, your choice of weapon will almost certainly be telling the reader something about that character, which I think is just such a cool concept and something that you don't see anywhere else. This is a truly unique concept along the lines of Yordles. I think Yordles are one of the other things that Riot has done that you just don't see mimicked anywhere else. This sort of halfling but not fairy but not creatures that also use technology. It's super weird and super interesting, and the Darkin are very similar in this regard, which I think is one of the reasons why they work so well as a concept. But you guys left in the middle what you think of the Darkin down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, definitely leave it a like. If you guys want to see more videos like this, let me know, and I can try to make more stuff like this. But let me know all that down in the comment section below. Again, if you enjoyed the video, leave it a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.